16 years ago, I let myself into a dark house at a friend's request. It's taken this long to find my way out.
There was one wave a little stronger than the others, and suddenly she was gone. He tried to swim with the current for a while to look, calling her name, but there was no sign of her.
She pictures herself as a spirit encased in a layer that can be peeled away and seamlessly zippered back in place. Her spirit in a new body that doesn't betray. Then she floats away, as light itself, no father's feet, no mother's hips to anchor her in place.
It's 3 a.m. She wants him to give up and go to sleep already. He laughed too and rolled towards her. They could be virtually silent, a skill one hones raising kids.
No way, Heathcliff laughed, cupping a hand. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Let go of me, Heathcliff, or I'm going to scream, Catherine hissed, twisting violently to get out of his grip, her fear of heights superseding her fear of causing a scene.
Russian ending or American ending? Ma asked. The wolf ate the bride either way. In the American ending, the bride was cut free from the dead wolf's belly and lived to tell the tale.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose Live, and happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. We're really excited today to host the authors from Furious Gravity, Volume 9. And before we introduce them, I just want to point everyone's attention to two things. The first is that there's a green button right below me that says Purchase. So you can click that and purchase Furious Gravity Volume 9 from Politics and Prose. It'd be a really great way to support your local indie bookstore and also to support some local authors. And secondly, I'd like to point out the Ask a Question feature, which is also at the bottom of your screen. The second portion of the event is going to be dedicated to your questions. And we'd really like to funnel the questions there just to make it easier for everyone. So I know there's the chat and I see a lot of great comments there already, but if we could get the questions in the Ask a Question area, that'd be amazing. And you can also read other people's questions and vote on the questions you'd like to hear answered the most. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Melissa Scholes Young. Melissa is the author of the novel Flood, the winner of the literary fiction category for the 2017 Best Book Award from American Book Fest. Her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Washington Post, Narrative, Plowshares, Poet Lore, and Poets and Writers. She's a contributing editor for Fiction Writers Review and editor of 2 volumes of DC Women Writers, Grace and Darkness from 2018 and Furious Gravity in 2020. Scholes Young was named the Bread Loaf Camargo Fellow and a Quarry Farm Fellow at the Center for Mark Twain Studies. She's an associate professor in the Department of Literature at American University in Washington, D.C. So please help me welcome Melissa Scholes Young.
Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for Tara Campbell and Mary Kay Zurleff, who are going to be joining us today for this discussion. As Tom said, I am Melissa Scholes Young, and welcome to the Furious Gravity book launch. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and thank you so much for sharing that book trailer. It was actually created by Gabrielle Bremer, who is one of my talented students at American University. My class played a huge role in bringing this community project to you. They developed a website, a book trailer, interviewing contributors. They wrote feature articles, and they also ran a very successful media campaign. I see Mary Kay on the screen. Welcome, Mary Kay.
Thank you.
And we're just waiting for one more. There's Tara. Welcome, Tara.
We made it.
You're here. I'm so glad you're here. I was just welcoming you, but also telling our audience that's gathered about the book trailer and the class and all of the work, all of the community-based work that has gone into bringing Furious Gravity to our readers. And if you are a reader who actually has the book in your hand, it's been a challenging time to get the book in your hands. So I want to thank my students in literary editing and publishing. I want to thank my department chair, David Pike, who supports this project endlessly, and Politics and Prose Bookstore for hosting us this afternoon and for supporting a project of DC women writers. So we'll be cheering a lot, we'll be clapping a lot. I expect you all in the audience to make a lot of noise as we go through this, even though we can't actually hear you. We can feel the energy in the universe. So thank you, readers, for joining us and bringing your story appetites to Politics and Prose. As I said, if you have a copy of this book, it is because Politics and Prose moved mountains to print it and to ship it to you in the safety of your home. If you don't have a copy of the book, you can click on that little button at the bottom of your screen, and they will do the exact same magic for you. It will be a great Mother's Day treat or a present, perhaps, for the mother in your life. So happy Mother's Day to all. And a very special happy Mother's Day, I have to say, to my mom, Kathy Scholes, who is in the audience today. She taught me that when you don't know how to do something, you just start. Thus, I am the editor of Furious Gravity and the Grace and Gravity series. So happy Mother's Day. And Mary Kay or Tara, do you have any shout outs that you want to share for the mothers in the audience too?
Well, of course, happy Mother's Day, but also you show that you do this with such grace, Melissa. We would have thought that you had done this many, many times. And I'm really grateful that you, A, got the book out, and then B, in all that's going on, figured out how to have your class be such a big participant. And it's been a joy. It's just been a complete joy.
Yes, happy Mother's Day to mothers here and past. They're always with us, even if they aren't with us. Mm-hmm. And happy Mother's Day to mothers of other stripes, like you, like people who are supporting networks. Even if you're not formal mothers, you're performing that support and providing that love. And so happy Mother's Day to you as well.
Happy Mother's Day to everyone. I'm going to invite you to bring something you'd like to cheers with. A cup of hot tea, your coffee, a Mother's Day mimosa, whatever you have, so that as we celebrate Furious Gravity and our contributors today, you can cheers along and celebrate with us. Furious Gravity is actually the second edition that I've had the honor of editing. It's the first one with the brilliant Wendy Bessel-Hahn on board to bring her expertise in nonfiction, and it's the 9th volume that we've published. The preface to Furious Gravity was generously written this year by Dolan Perkins Valdez, who reminds us that the streets of DC have always been filled with women who sing and stomp and shout, and you'll see the writers in Furious Gravity do the same, and with grace. More than a decade ago, Richard Peabody, a DC literary legend, founded the Grace and Gravity series, and we have together published hundreds of DC writers over thousands of pages, actually too many pages that we can't even count how many. And if you're in the audience today and you've been published in one of these volumes, cheers to you, because it's a huge network in our community that I think showcases what we do best, which is support each other and write really incredible stories. So cheers to you as well. This afternoon, it's my pleasure to welcome 50 fresh voices to this platform. We'll also be taking questions at the end of the readings, and we'd welcome a chat about the community that fostered this energy that is Furious Gravity. So now I'd like to share the introduction to Volume 9 and sit back, relax, and listen. I'm thinking a lot these days about space. The spaces we occupy and share, the spaces emotional, mental, and physical that we hold for others, the space my body needs and the powers that try to control that space, the spaces we violate, sometimes on purpose, but often from carelessness, even the spaces we avoid to protect ourselves and others. When I share space with readers and writers in our DC community, I feel an abundance. We pack independent bookstores when a fellow author has a new book. We show up for literary potlucks and readings and conferences. When a local literary magazine hosts a meetup, it's often standing room only. We hold space for each other's words and voices. And when Mary Kay brings DMV women writers together, she asks us to share one thing we can offer our community and encourages us to ask for something we need. I'm humbled in these spaces by the generosity and the sincerity. This is the writing community I dreamed about when I first put pen to paper, and it is available to all who want to join us at the table. Richard Peabody founded the Grace and Gravity series as a space for women's voices. The intention was and is to amplify women writers who might have to shout to be heard. What we promise our contributors is community and an inclusive Grace sisterhood that strives to be our best and continues to grow. My deepest desire when I inherited this series was to fill these pages with writers who have courage and grace. We received a record number of submissions and selected 50 of the freshest stories that showed us the forces that bind, hopes that lift, and wishes that repel and remain. Furious Gravity is proud to be a place where many new writers are publishing their first work, where mid-career authors experiment, and where established writers share something new. Sometimes there is sadness and joy on these pages and in our community. There is kindness and hate. We hear bigotry and justice. We can hold all and both at the same time. There is enough room. Our table has plenty of space. Let's get more chairs. I'll save you a seat.
I love that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So deep bows of gratitude to all of the Furious Gravity contributors. And I, again, raise my glass, my mimosa, to Mother's Days and to writers everywhere in our community. I'd like to get started with the reading. I'm going to ask Mary Kay to go first. Mary Kay is the author of 3 novels, including Man Alive and The Bolt. Look, Man Alive is right there. Look at that. Product placement.
I was thinking that.
Your books are on my shelf too. Mary Kay is the author of 3 novels, Man Alive and The Bowl Is Already Broken. The story in this excerpt is from her upcoming novel, Buried Sunshine. And I think you'll see why we chose this one.
I'm so happy to be here. I am so delighted with this volume and this project. I mean, I love that Melissa has done 2 of them and that Richard Peabody did so many of them. And when people talk about DC writers, I always say it's the most supportive and delightful group. I mean, in other cities, they're really competitive and they don't share. In our city, they share. And I love that. There's a lot more readings that go with this book that I'm sure Melissa will tell you about. I've already been an audience in one and just was blown away. So if spread the word because there'll be more celebrations and more. This is called Russian Ending or American Ending. January 8th, 1920. I was raised to believe that wolves talk and old believers rise from the dead, that a good woman can make soup from a stone and a good man's snot is black with coal dust. I was also raised to marry the man Ma and Pa picked out for me, and I bucked that. Born in Pennsylvania, the first American in my family, I didn't have to take what comes the way they did. Victor and I decided on each other, and after we got away with that, we got away from the mines, where most of ours who aren't crushed or gassed end up dead from drink. Now, here you are, showing up at my door and saying I'm not American. That's like saying my children aren't my children. Victor would have let you in the first time you buzzed, except I'd sent him to the Russian club for pinochle. The baby's hair was lathered up, which is why I hollered, expecting Rita to let herself in for straight pins or a cake of yeast. And instead you chirped back, fancy and friendly. Shall I return a bit later? That told me you weren't one of us. My own Ma would have said, you are too busy for me. I took a line from the switchboard operator script I'd been practicing. To whom am I speaking, please? Francis G. Byrne. I'm the census enumerator for this neighborhood. Shall I start upstairs? Again with the shall. Yes, please. Your heels clacked up to Rita and Pavel's, and their buzzers snored through our exhaust vent. I didn't want you to see me fishing a baby from the sink, clothes heaped on the floor, a dirty diaper next to the pail. I pulled Tom Tom's nightshirt over his big round head and propped him in his chair, relieved that Hazel was down for the night. Let's sit up and be counted, I said, stuffing hot pads at his sides to keep him upright. My heart lurched in my chest when I opened the door to you, Frances G. Byrne. You looked to be my age, and your hair was bobbed like mine, though everything else was ritzier, T-straps and column skirt beneath your green wool coat collared in fur. I'm skinny, but knobby-kneed and round-faced, bustier than usual from nursing. With your slim figure and tapered fingers, you looked like the women in the pattern books Ma and I used to page through. You'd only come in my house far enough for me to close the door against the cold. You said I was swell to offer you tea and cake, swell, but you simply could not. Besides, we'd be done lickety-split, you said. I was rattled by my own first name, or maybe you were. Instead of Yelena, I became Elaine with one stroke of your pen. I couldn't bring myself to correct you. And besides, it didn't seem like lying to have you record the American version of my name. Hearing how Victor is spelled with a K, you said, that's distinctive. Then you sounded Gomelikov out slowly. Go mail a cough. I worried you might roll your eyes, but you said, Victor Gomelikov, an expert on the second try. And where was he born? Russian Poland, I was careful to say instead of Russia. Suwalki. I wouldn't have predicted that I'd marry someone from the same town as my parents. Then it was more names and dates and me grinning like a sap, the two of us chuckling at father's mother tongue and mother's mother tongue. You raced through the form tallying us as white people who rent our apartment and work as a laborer and domestic. And I was watching every move you made. So I was watching when you filled in the box that separates the sheep from the goats. That's wrong, I objected. That box should be blank for me. Naturalized or alien, those were choices for foreigners. I pointed to the letter you'd linked in, A for alien. I was born here. But your husband wasn't. You touched your gold nib pen to Victor's line where the ink was dry. It's such a silly law, a stinker from Teddy Roosevelt. You tittered the way you did over father's mother tongue. Nothing about this is silly. I feel useless as an egg that's been cracked and emptied, and worse for the shame of having done the same thing as you, telling Russians to go back where they came from. Because I'm American, and that's what Americans do. Americans with their county fairs and libraries, their pot roasts and their crusted fruit pies. Americans not expecting the worst. I fell for it all. As a kid, I acted like my parents crossed the ocean in 1898 to give birth to me. What do you want, a medal? My little brother asked. He was born here, but I was born first. And believe it or not, when I was 9, our 2 older sisters came to Mariana on the same train as Teddy Roosevelt. My older sister learned enough of my language to taunt me. Your country gave you straw for hair and pancakes for bosoms. She was born first, but not here. She said, it stinks here. She was as right about the dead horse smell as she was about my thatched hair and the flapjacks on my chest. Both my sisters had heavy, dark eyelids that made them look sleepy, or sultry if you were a man, and men were interested as soon as they arrived. At 13 and 12, the 2 of them were wavy from the top of their heads to their bottoms. They waved to the youngest miners from our porch and hollered, yoo-hoo! If Pa rounded the corner to see a wink or a how do you do, he'd light out after the sparking miners, swinging his dinner pail, aiming to smack the boys in the ribs. He called them wolves, Volky, Volky, and said if they didn't stop their panting, the president would send them back where they came from. Shame on you, Frances G. Byrne. You're meant to count everyone, not judge them. The way I hear it, Victor isn't the one who changed my story. Roosevelt is. Say I turn the tables on you. I'll wave my own pencil around and make my mark the way you did, the way Ma wanted me to. Will that make any difference? Russian ending or American ending? Ma asked us at bedtime when I was barely the oldest. I'd been drenched in fever sweat for days, so bad off that Ma sent for Doc. He said the 3 of us could still share a bed, as long as I could get the rest I needed. But who could rest after hearing how Ma and Pa packed up and left Suwalki one day, leaving their 2 daughters behind? I stayed awake, imagining every scrape was the trunk being dragged from under their bed, every squeak the wagon carting them away from us. That was a Russian ending. And Ma's fairy tales were worse, like the wolf who tells the bride to climb on his back for a ride to her wedding, and instead, he eats her. I lashed a toenail, Ma growled, and she tickled us 3. The wolf story got Kostya shuddering so hard he shook the bed. Then Pearl wet herself. Russian ending, everyone suffer, Ma said that night. I'll give you American ending for my tender American children. She said tender the way the wolf might. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kay. I admire this story so much. Part of it is because it wrestles with identity and how to have hope during dark days. And we're all feeling dark days these days. I'm wondering, you are such a prolific writer. Why did you choose this story to submit to Furious Gravity?
Well, first of all, isn't it crazy how you're working on something and then the world conspires to match what you're writing 100 years ago? So I've been working on this novel a long time, and how to tell it and how it's told has been tricky. And then when I saw that this was called Furious Gravity, one day I thought, she's furious, I'm furious, we're all furious. And so I love short stories. They're completely different from novels. And I thought, I wonder if I could craft a story with its own arc out of this. And I think I sent it to you at 11:55 p.m. before the midnight deadline.
That's on time. That's on time.
Your daughter was doing her college applications. I was trying to get this, what's the tense? Do I have the tense right? And you sent me a little timestamp, made it by midnight. Yeah. So, a completely different way to tell one of the stories that is in the novel, as opposed to just the first 10 pages.
And it fits so well because there is such fury, but there's fuel in anger too. Like the ways that it is useful and sometimes protects us and brings us together and binds us, but also makes us act, right? And in ways that are important too. And this reminds me so much of your essay that I read last week in the Washingtonian about writing through this pandemic, which is, I think, a question all of us writers get is, how are you getting anything done? And I think we would all welcome your advice on finding purpose in our writing lives with so much uncertainty in our futures.
It's so distracting, isn't it? Yeah, and then I also remember reading a line from someone that said, I do not want to read an essay that does not acknowledge the privilege of, where we live, how healthy we are, that there is medical attention available, that there's food, for God's sake. I mean, so that essay is really just about the privilege and the panic and the dailiness, one day like another. And I've been flummoxed by this novel and how to parse it because I have so much material. And if it takes more than a couple of years to write a novel, you're a different person. And so then you have other and new things to say. And, a good friend who's a writer said, just an hour a day, just take it an hour a day. It's the bird by bird approach, right? And so I've been looking at it an hour a day, and the good news is an hour turns into more. And there are so many dog walks, and that's a good time to, or in the case of our house, dog draft. And so there's a lot of time to sort of be putting things through that ringer that there's a little more downtime than there used to be, even though we're very distracted.
Well, and I think one of the things that struck me so much about your essay is that it first acknowledges the grief. And this has been, for me, so important in my classroom, rather than moving quite so quickly toward how do we get back on track or what are we going to do next, sitting in the space, again, that holds the grief about what has been lost.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was teaching creative writing when 9/11 happened. And I was driving to Goucher, where I was teaching that semester, and thinking, oh my God, we're going to talk about short stories, met a guy in a bar, and each day the Times would run these obituaries, and it was the stories that we told about these people that was devastating us. And I got to class and I, of course, was crying. And I said to them, you know, it's important that we tell these stories, and it's important that we make up stories. It's important that we have an imagination and imagine ourselves into other times and acknowledge the grief. And that's kind of how we got ourselves through that. And then during this, I was thinking, I don't want to come through this unchanged. I want to come through healthy, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to be so insulated that it's like, oh, shoo, life goes back. So I've been thinking about that too, and who's able to address it head on.
I finished editing this collection in January, long before we were in the middle, and I actually wrote the introduction about holding space in January. But and so many of these stories speak to exactly the moment we are in. So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, Mary Kay, for just a second. We'll come back and we'll chat a lot more later, but I want to bring Tara in and introduce you and hear the humor. This side of it too, we always rely. I think it's a big burden in our community sometimes, Tara, to have to be the one that makes us laugh, but it's my favorite kind of laughter because it's a gut punch too. Tara Campbell, of course, is a writer, a Campbell Fellow and fiction editor at Barrel House. Prior publications include Smoke Long Quarterly, Masters Review, Monkey Bicycle, Jellyfish Review, Booth, Strange Horizons, and Escape Pod, Artemis Rising. She's the author of the novel Treevolution and a hybrid fiction poetry collection, Circe's Bicycle. I really do think I have both of them on my shelf as well. I don't know how these things happen. It's just amazing. I make magic. And a short story collection, of course, Midnight at the Orangaporium. She received her MFA from American University in 2019. And Tara, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much. There are so many people to thank, but today in particular, Tom with Politics and Prose, Melissa, Wendy, Mary Kay, of course, and everyone who's here. Thank you so much. I also wanted to give a shout out to the class of 2000 in the MFA program at American University. I was planning on joining you tonight for the reading until I found out that it was actually last night. And my inability to read an email kept me from joining you. But I was joining you in spirit, or intending to join you in spirit tonight. But
and it's recorded. It's recorded, Tara, so you get to watch it all.
So yes, so congratulations, late, but still heartfelt. And yes, well, you know, the thing about, you know, being the comic relief was I almost didn't submit at all because I felt like, what does my stuff have to do with furious gravity? I mean, if this were called furious goofiness, then yes, I would have submitted the first day. But a lot of my stuff is indirect. And I maybe do get at the rage, but in a different way that doesn't always feel like rage. And so Melissa's encouragement was I appreciate it, because I didn't think of my stories that way, but there are a lot of ways to look at humor, and there can be that element of fury in it. So yes, gravity can be goofy as well. So that is a segue into my story. I'm just going to read the first little bit of Barry Knows Best, and then maybe we can talk about bacon-based coping mechanisms during these hard times. So Barry Knows Best. Jordan sat by the storefront window and stared at the contract, twiddling the pen in her hand. This should have been the easy part. The moment where she signed away all the headaches of the past 3 years, tracking shipments from flaky providers, scrounging around for the cheapest advertising, putting yet another month of utilities on her credit card. Holding auditions for Barry the Bako Boutique spokespig was probably the only part of the venture she truly enjoyed. She reached down and scratched the bristly, cream-colored hair behind one of Barry's ears. She thought she'd wanted a traditional pink until this little calico gentleman stole her heart. He grunted and butted her leg with his snout until she leaned over and scratched under his chin. Oh, Barry, she sighed. I don't know what I'll do without you. Barry kept snout butting her leg until she put down her pen, picked him up, and settled him into her lap. She She nestled the tip of her nose against the back of his head, breathing in the rosemary shampoo they both preferred. "I told you to stop getting into my lap," she murmured. "This is making it all the harder to give you up." Barry grunted softly and turned to look at her through one black-ringed eye. That's what had done it. That dark oblong spot sloping around his left eye like a jaunty beret. This was the pot-bellied teacup pig for her. He was considerably larger than a teacup, however, easily stretching his snout up to nuzzle her chin. "Stop it," she said gently. "I have to sell the boutique, and quick, because the health inspector comes back. Before the health inspector comes back. He didn't find you as charming as I do." She sighed and scratched behind his ears. "Besides, the new owner loves you, and she has a nice big house with a huge yard you can run around in. She won't have to keep you locked up in the store at night." Barry snorted and exhaled, which sounded uncannily like a sigh, then turned away and snuffled around the tabletop. He began to nibble at the contract. Jordan pushed the papers out of his reach. "I have to sell, Barry. Look." She pulled her laptop closer and opened a search window, arms circling him as she typed. "This jerk," she said, pointing at the picture of the building manager, "is about to raise rent. He won't even pay for an exterminator, and he's raising the rent." Barry grunted, and Jordan narrowed her eyes at the picture of Nick Nickerson, arms crossed, a smug smile stretching his thin lips into an entitled capitalist bro rictus. "He could at least do something about the rats," she grumbled. The longer she looked at the picture, the sourer her stomach felt. Nickerson's "I own the world" grin reminded her of the way her apartment landlord had started looking at her ever since her upstairs neighbor moved out. That lease was also up for renewal soon, and with her luck, rent would go up at home, too. Greedy bastards. Barry grunted, loud soft, and Jordan laughed because it sounded exactly like what she'd just said. She smoothed his fur, trying not to dwell on the rumors about her former upstairs neighbor, at home, who'd gotten behind on her rent. They said the landlord offered to give her a break in rent in exchange for things. Then he evicted her anyway. Barry squealed, and Jordan realized she was clutching him too tightly. She gathered him up off her lap and placed him back on the floor. "Help me clean?" Jordan turned on the radio, and Barry played with his vacuum cleaner squeaky toy while she wiped down the two tables in the storefront and polished the display case full of bacon-laced cookies and brownies. Then, after straightening the racks of bacon jerky and chocolate-covered bacon on the counter, she started a fresh batch of cinnamon bacon popcorn to lure in an afternoon rush. Over the popping, the end of a news story caught her attention. She turned up the volume. "Police say an autopsy will confirm the cause of death and determine what role the rats may have played. Once again, a local health inspector was found dead in an alley in the Bunker Hill neighborhood in Northwest, covered with numerous bite marks." Jordan turned off the radio, hand over her mouth. "Shit, Barry, that's here." He trotted up to her and snout-butted her leg. Just as she bent to pick him up, he frisked away, drawing her into a game of chase. She welcomed the distraction. At least she thought this might give her more time before the next inspection, more time to think things through. That evening, as always, Barry trotted close on Jordan's heels. Grunting quietly behind her, she headed toward the front door. She sighed. "Sorry, Barry, you know pets aren't allowed where I live." Her landlord was absent enough for frequent Barry sleepovers, but she couldn't risk keeping him there full time. Just the thought of that creep discovering Barry and having something to hold over her made her stomach turn. Jordan led him to her office in the back of the store and sat on the floor next to him while he settled onto his giant pillow. She grabbed his current bedtime book from a nearby shelf and read him a chapter before kissing him goodnight and closing up the shop.
Thank you, Tara. I shouldn't have been surprised, but so many of the stories that I read, like Barry Knows Best, in the collection tried to right wrongs that writers were seeing in the world. And Barry clearly understands the strife that Jordan is going through. A small business owner, she's got this greedy landlord, she's trying to make it like everyone else. Do you tend to write stories that seek this type of justice? I mean, do you think writing is inherently political?
I was thinking about this question because I will admit, like certain people in certain presidential debates, we did get the questions ahead of time. But it was interesting to think about the word justice and really think about what that means. Because when I hear the word justice, I often think about a result, like something put to right. Some people describe justice as sort of more toward the beginning of a process in terms of fairness and giving equal opportunities so that we don't have to fix the wrongs that happen through injustice. So it really made me think about those terms. And I think in general, I do think about fairness a lot. And writing is a way to sort of voice frustration at so many examples of unfairness. And I do it more directly in poetry, for example. Like when I get pissed off at a specific thing, it often comes out as poetry. When I write stories, it's more an exploration. I usually don't know where a story is going to end when I start it. I really don't even know what's going to happen in the middle. But it's really more a way to work through things that are preoccupying me. So I be thinking about stories, a lot of them do stem from just sort of dealing with, what do we do about unfairness? How do we deal with it? And even if I'm not thinking about that as an engine for the story, when I look back after having been asked that question, I do see elements of that in the stories, even if indirectly.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at the world around you and can't help but notice these things that are attached to our stories. So it's not an agenda, it's simply a way of processing and asking questions. Why is this happening? Why is this thing happening to these people?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I look at it through a prism of having been raised to have a lot of self-confidence. I've found through my adulthood that I haven't had to deal with a lot of the battles that other women have had to deal with in terms of being underestimated, in terms of being taught to think that you can do certain things and this person can do other things. And so coming into backing up, I mean, I was born and raised in Alaska, so it was like a very small environment. And throughout my life, living in other places in the US and other countries, and seeing how other people have been raised and what other women have been raised that they should expect, I'm like, what the hell? What's up with that? So I think a lot of what I write comes from the standpoint of knowing, like, why are these limitations here? I mean, they look weird to me because I didn't have to, live through them. At least not in an overt way. So yeah, I think that really has, sort of provided the inspiration for a lot of my work, and actually probably my interest in speculative fiction, because the realities that we're trained to accept are by far not the only realities out there in the world. And that real friction comes between those two worlds colliding.
That's part of what I love about all the stories in this collection, and fiction in general and nonfiction. I can see a perspective that maybe isn't mine, and I can develop compassion and empathy for another person's way of being, even if I haven't experienced it myself. These stories open my eyes and allow me to walk in someone else's shoes for a while. I think we should bring some other questions and all of our readers into the conversation. So let me see. Well, the first
question, it's so refreshing to hear someone say that you're raised with great self-confidence. That's so refreshing to hear, isn't it?
I think it's given Tara the confidence to continue to take care of the very, very prolific vine that grows behind her. Tara, before we get to the questions, do introduce the audience to your true project in life.
This is Maxine, and she's been with me for about over 20 years. I got her the first time I moved to DC, And I decided I needed something green because my mom was just like all about plants and yarn. Those were her two driving forces in life. So I went to the plant shop and I said, give me something I can't kill. And they gave me a philodendron, and it was in a pot about this big originally. And so in 20 years, she has taken over the house. A good friend kept her for me when I was living overseas, and I came and took her back, and she didn't hold it against me. And yeah, so she has really taken over the living room and the office in the next room. She is my inspiration.
I really like Maxine's perseverance. I like she's not asking permission. Yes, she's not asking permission. So welcome.
She doesn't take much. She doesn't take much guff. So she keeps us in line.
So one of the questions that we got, Mary Kay, is about your decision to give voice to an immigrant woman. So will you talk for a minute about this subject? I know this is an excerpt from the novel, so you're spending a lot of time writing about immigrants.
Yeah, so this is based on both sides of my family. Everybody comes from the same little town in what is now Poland, and comes to be imported to be coal miners. So, you know, your way is paid, and then you're thrown down a hole, and there's no safety, and then everything comes out of your check. And you talk about justice, you talk about unfairness, and my grandmother on my father's side was born in Pennsylvania, and doing some research, and there's a family story, which you have to listen to your family stories. Some of them are myth, and some of them, and it people used to say, Baba lost her citizenship when she married Jet. It has a nice iambic rhythm to it. So I thought they'd just kind of taken that story, and on the 1920 census, there she is, and it says A, like a scarlet letter. It says A for alien, and she never left the state. And so that is not that well known. Did not happen to men, but American women lost their citizenship if they married foreigners, and my grandfather was born in Russia. So I'm distilling her story, moving it back a little bit in time. And every day you write something in fiction, and then there it is again, you know, blaming the immigrants, and not taking care of the immigrants, and the unfairness of it, and a new law, and you were a citizen, now you're not a citizen. And oh my God, it's just been sad that 100 years later, no difference.
And so your fiction partly comes from nonfiction, I think, and that distinction between fiction and nonfiction is something Wendy and I have talked a great deal about, because Wendy's expertise is really in nonfiction as joining me in the editing process. And Wendy, when we would read submissions, would say, is this fiction or nonfiction? And she was so thoughtful about it. And I just didn't care. I just wanted the story.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised always when I learn that fiction is based, in fact, on fact. And that sometimes what I read in the newspaper can seem just as dystopian, just as speculative as something in Tara's work as well. To the point where the distinction doesn't matter as much to me. It's the story. It's the story that keeps coming back.
But I love what Tara said about justice, having it be an act of restitution in some ways. And the people in my book and my life, you know, they kept striving and kept thinking, and, you know, it's any civil rights, any immigrant rights, that we're going to take care of this, and then, and then another hurdle out. Let's get another, So that is sobering.
And
well, Barry is nonfiction, so I'm so glad that, you know, the story can finally be told.
Here's the thing: we want Barry to be nonfiction. We all need a bacon boutique that has.
I'm a little worried for Jordan. I mean, she's selling berries, so I'm a little worried for Jordan's future.
I think it's hard on the other side, knowing Barry's story so well. But there is a thing that we're not telling the audience about this story, and I'm going to keep it a secret so that they can go, of course, buy their own copies of Furious Gravity and actually find out what the revenge piece really is. Because
so someone just wrote in the questions, hashtag Team Barry. Get it trending now.
We're getting a lot of questions about other reading recommendations, and I just want everyone to know that when we conclude our conversation, we're all going to give you a ton of summer reading recommendations. So hold on. Tara, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just saying Barry and Maxine are soulmates. You know, they inspire one another. So,
and when you talk for just a minute, Tara, we had another question that was about writing flash fiction, because so many of our contributors, part of what I love about editing the series is when I hear, oh, I wrote this story in Tara's workshop. I wrote this story in Beth's workshop. I wrote this story in Mary Kay's. And it's such a great community of writers teaching writers. And will you both talk for just a minute about that kind of energy also, and also how we can take your classes?
Well, I'll just mention that the story in this collection I wrote as a result of another person's class. This story began in a flash fiction class, and the prompt was just to write a beginning without even thinking about where it's going to go. And I'm like, well, I'm in my wheelhouse here. So, but yeah, I mean, I feel like especially now, I feel like writers are just like running around signing up for each other's classes, because at this point in time, everyone feels so unmoored. And we need just kind of a little gentle steering and a little accountability, and to know that, yes, someone is relying on you for this little thing to turn in this story at this time, and they're going to pay attention to it. And so for me, this writing community has just been immensely important, both in terms of structured classes and in terms of, writing groups, and just feeling like part of a community where you can hop onto Zoom and people are taking each other's work seriously, but you're also having fun and just laughing and connecting. So it has been incredibly important. And now that we're connecting online, we're seeing how far our networks extend, and that is another beautiful thing.
And how accessible they can actually be when we are intentional about making them so.
That's what I was so amazed at the Writers Center reading. There were 70 of us there. There were like 10 readers. It was so intimate. That's partly in credit to you, Melissa, and Vanetta, who was the MC that night. But it was just so beautiful. And writing is really lonely. And so to have community of like-minded people trying to do the same thing. And one of my writing partners, sometimes we check in and she'd just say, put a spoon in the next scene. Oddly, she had a spoon that she was eating her yogurt with, because a voice from outside your own head can make all the difference. And someone saying, what is your intention today? How did you do? So I'm a huge believer in cheering people on, and then also in celebrating every time you hit your mark and a publication comes out, or you are happy with the story or the book. I love unboxing the books. I mean, it's just a thrill to take every victory lap you can.
I want to say that Writers Center event was so incredibly intimate, and these platforms in many ways I think are changing us in good ways. And that is also a huge shout out to Amy Freeman, who I think asks the most important question at the beginning of this, which is, how are the three of us so amazing? It's a great question, Amy. I'm afraid we don't actually have time for that answer, because they only give us an hour here, so we'll have to table that one for now. But Wendy asks a great question in the chat about research and about looking at the actual census, taking records, Mary Kay. And you can probably speak to this also, Tara. What role does research play in the stories that you're writing? Or is it just a way to avoid the writing? Or how is it fueled also?
It's the first time I've tried historical fiction. And so in other places, there's the 3 Google rule, only 3 clicks, so because I can go down any rabbit hole.
That's a rule? That's
Someone said it. One of the NaNoWriMo guys said, put yourself to 3 clicks, because the world is very interesting, and things have these connections that you can't believe, that when you look down this, there's that. So this research is tricky because I am telling a story, and also my great aunt wrote a novel with a 4th grade education that was sort of the springboard of all of this. And then what's true and what isn't. Now I don't even know what's true and what isn't. Yeah. And I have to keep telling myself, Edward Jones always says this, that, he would get 16 books on slave cabins out of the Library of Congress. And he opened one and he thought, what a slave cabin looks like. He was whittling his granddaughter a doll outside the slave cabin. You know what it looks like. I don't have to tell you every pine. And I think about that all the time, because some of that research, you have to resist the urge to tell every single person how they mined laying on their back underground. And you have to know it, and then you have to drip it out in only ways that the character, it matters to the character. And that has been very challenging.
So you see the research process as essential to the writer, but it doesn't all make it on the page.
Yeah, it shouldn't be on the page.
Yeah. What needs to be on the page is all that makes it there. Which means we have to know a lot more about our characters than we ever tell. Right. Tara, do you use research also?
Yeah, and I was thinking about it from a speculative fiction lens, specifically science fiction. The impetus for my novel was not, I want to write a novel. I was a pantser there too, so I'm like incapable of following a plot or even knowing what a plot is. I shouldn't say that. Nobody will buy my books. But anyway, so the impetus for the novel was research. Basically, I heard a report on NPR about a team of French scientists who had created a device with which they could translate the sounds of a tree's circulatory system and hear if it was in distress before any visible signs appeared. They could hear if it was getting enough water or not. And so they knew when a tree was in trouble before the tree started to die, before the tree started to suffer visually.
Before it fell in the forest.
Exactly, you know, and it was just, that was just amazing to me, because I've always been obsessed with plants. I don't know how anyone can tell. So I started doing research because I thought this is amazing. And it came from a what if. So I heard this report and then I had a what if, you know, what else could plants and trees be trying to tell us that we just don't understand yet? So I started doing all this research into, well, what else is going on in terms of, you know, decoding the language of plants and plant communication in itself. And, you know, it's just this astounding network of communication, coordination, cross species. You know, it takes a village to raise a tree. It really does. They don't just help each other, they help other species at different seasons, you know, so they're already planning.
What a metaphor for this book.
It's amazing. And all this stuff we don't give them credit for. We think only we as, you know, humans can communicate, or we credit other creatures with being able to communicate because we can see it happening. The trees have a much different scale of time and language and lifespan. And so I was just, the research was what really fascinated me and inspired me. And so my challenge that I set for myself was to basically see how far I could take my reader with known science, and then just slip over the Rubicon into, you know, this is where the fiction part takes over, and how do I make that seem as indistinguishable as possible? And the reality takes us much farther than we would suspect. So the research was what really got me excited about the whole project, and that's how it turned into a novel at all, because I was just interested in the topic.
I love that research propelled you, because sometimes it can like, overwhelm you.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I want to continue this conversation, and luckily we get to in several more places this week, because we also are having a reading. Readings on the Pike is on the 14th. There's a reading at Rhizome on the 24th, and we'll put all of these new. Oh, and I'm going to be on the Kojo Nandi show on Thursday.
Wonderful.
Talking about Furious Gravity and talking about this series and Richard Peabody's energy. And also the way that it has become such an institution of DC women writers. And I'm so pleased that there are 5 pieces in this book that are writers in their first publications. And that's a really, really exciting thing to discover as an editor. There's so many parts of this project. So I'm going to encourage everybody to go over to Grace and Gravity DC. And there you can see all of my students' work, the interviews. You can see the website, of course, the book trailer again. The spotlights they wrote, and all of the feature articles. There's a ton of media that's been written around this book as well. So it's been an amazing light in a pretty dark time. I have to say, this has buoyed me. And before we go, I'm going to ask for reading recommendations so that you can buy all of your books through Politics and Prose. They will ship them to the safety of your house. They do it so very quickly. This project would not have happened without this partnership between American University and Politics and Prose, and without women writers in the area being willing to show me their guts, because that's really what this book is a part of. So Mary Kay, will you go first? Give us some summer reading recommendations.
Sure. Okay, so I love this book, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. She's a British, maybe Irish writer. And so it's about people doing Bronze Age reenactments, and the young girl who's brought along for the ride. How to Be Both by Ali Smith, another British writer. And then Alice McDermott's latest novel, The Ninth Hour, is, I mean, all her novels are astonishing, but this is, and I'm currently reading in honor of the coronavirus, Love in the Time of Cholera, because I have not read it before. How have I not read it before? So I'm reading that now.
And for those of you, by the way, who need a bit more pleasure in your life, Laura Zam is in the chat, and her latest, her first book, speaking of another DC women writer, is out last week, but she's running an entire series. I don't know the difference between the series and the title of her book, but it's her pleasure.
Well, I want to say shout out to Laura, and in preparing for this, I looked through a few other volumes of Grace and Gravity. I mean, it's just, there was a Laura Zam story, there was a Lisa Page story, there was, so it was very exciting. People that I've taught, people that I've known, people that I first met when I came here. So what a community. And thank you, Melissa, for keeping it going. And your students are amazing.
My students are amazing. Tara, go with your reads, please.
Yes, so I'm holding up 2 editions of The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and please don't let your eyes glaze over if you don't think you read speculative fiction, because I think if you read these stories, you realize, oh, I do read it. I have been reading it, because it can be stories about human relationships, about individual challenges that have nothing to do with space, for example, that you don't need to know science to enjoy some of these stories. I'm teaching a class in speculative fiction for the uninitiated, and this is a class for people who haven't really read or written much science fiction, and they're loving the stories because they're about human relationships. Like the one we're reading is a story about a mother-son relationship over time, and it's got a magical element in it. So it's not about rockets and technology and all that kind of stuff. Another popular class favorite is Nalo Hopkinson's Skinful. She is she brings a little bit of the Caribbean into what has traditionally been a very white male European Eurocentric genre. So Caribbean lore here. And N.K. Jemisin, How Long Till Black Future Month?
I love that title.
Yes. The thing I like about this is it's almost like a primer of what is speculative fiction, because there's science fiction, there's fantasy, there's urban fantasy, there's mysticism, there's every kind of, it's like a little, let me open up the whole genre here and, hear it from a Black woman's perspective, So yeah, these are texts I'd love to pull out for people who may not consider themselves sci-fi geeks, but yes, you are, and I will make you one.
I'm happy to be made one. And thank you for your recs. Tom is doing an amazing job in our chat of actually popping up the books that we're recommending also. There was another question we're not going to have time to talk about, but it related to the book recs that I'm about to give, which was, how do you turn a short story or flash fiction piece into a novel? And the collections I'm going to recommend, I think, are the actual primer for how to do that. This is R.L. Mays's We Love Anderson Cooper. This one came out last year, and it's her debut collection of short stories. And this summer, to follow it up, is the novel Other People's Pets by R.L. Mays. And the question is a great one, because we're all wrestling with that too. What is the container that our work needs? And so when I have the answer, I'll be writing about it for Fiction Writers Review, because that's the next question I have is, when is it a short story? When is it a novel? And what container needs to actually hold it? And those are the things I'm thinking about these days. Thank you so much to our readers. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to Politics and Prose. Thank you to the 50 contributors who were brave enough to send me their work. And kind enough to go on this journey with me, because I didn't know we were going to be launching Volume 9 in the middle of a pandemic, but we've done it.
Oh,
and I think we did it pretty well. And we will continue to celebrate and continue to have celebrations and conversations like this. So thank you very much for joining me also.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, everyone.
Happy Mother's Day.
Bye.